We are slowly inching our way closer to college football season, and while we're still a ways away, the sports books are releasing their futures bets for regular season win totals for teams. While this is not a sports betting YouTube channel, we're not going to give betting advice. We do want to dive in because it gives an interesting look at what betting professionals and the general public are thinking about these teams coming into the next year. Um, so, if you're not already subscribed, please click below, click subscribe to this channel. I greatly appreciate it. We're going to dive right in. So the ACC win totals are out. Clemson and Florida State are at the top. I've excluded them here. We're going to spend most of our time talking about Clemson and Florida State, but I do want to just run through some of these other teams. Um, at the bottom, we'll start at the bottom. If you look at Virginia, they won 3 games last year. Of course, they canceled 2 games because of the tragedy, um, but only 3.5 this year. And frankly, that seems about right to me. They don't even have a particularly tough ACC schedule. They avoid Clemson and Florida State, but their offense is just dreadful. Last year, Tony Elliott came in. He did not retain offensive coordinator Robert Anae, who went up to Syracuse. You saw Syracuse's offense immediately get better. You saw Virginia's completely tank. Quarterback Brennan Armstrong set records the year prior. He had 4,449 passing yards, 31 touchdowns. In year one with Tony Elliott, he had 2,210 and 7 touchdowns. He is headed to NC State via the transfer portal. Their best cornerback, who had the highest rating per PFF and the entire ACC, Fentrell Cypress, is also headed out already through the transfer portal, and he signed with Florida State. So I think it could be a long year for Virginia. Brent Key's taking over after a solid job as an interim at Georgia Tech. They had 5 wins last year, and although they're projected at technically less than that at 4.5, they've got a tough schedule, and I think you're seeing them trend somewhat in the right direction. They lost Jeff Sims, their quarterback, to Nebraska, so I think that can make sense as to why you're seeing that win total actually go down. They have a tough schedule that does not include Florida State, but does include Clemson, UNC, and they play both Ole Miss and Georgia in the non-conference. So fairly tough schedule as they always have. Um, they interestingly seem to take a lot of Clemson transfers. Tyson Pumachan, they took, and now he left. He's going to UMass. Paul Teo from the offensive line is still there. And Etanosa Rubin just transferred there from Clemson this year. So kind of a weird Clemson connection there. Virginia Tech, they've got a long rebuild ahead of them. They landed Ali Jennings from Old Dominion, a wide receiver that I was hoping Clemson would grab. So that's a good ad for them, but they've got a long way to go, and 5 wins is probably about right. They've got a tough road ahead. Boston College, they lost their quarterback, Phil Dracovic. They lost Zay Flowers, which is probably the biggest loss. They added quite a few players via the transfer portal, including wide receiver Ryan Keefe from UCF. They actually brought in 8 total transfers, but I like Halfley. I'd really like to see him be successful there. That's a tough place to win, and getting to a bowl is probably their goal. So that 5.5 mark's about right. The first one that's kind of weird to me is Wake Forest at 6 wins. I think you could sort of pencil them in for that as almost like their floor. Now they do have a tough schedule getting Clemson, Florida State, and Notre Dame. But even if they drop all of those, they could drop 3 more and still push and get 6. They'll probably struggle in November. Seems like they always do, but they'll rack up a lot of wins before then. To me, that seems like the best bet for an over. Look at Syracuse. Um, they lost Robert and I, who was there for 1 year. He went from Virginia to Syracuse. Now he goes to NC State. They also lost star running back Sean Tucker, so scooting him back just a hair from 7 to 6.5 seems about right. Duke had a great year, 9 total wins, but 8 regular season wins. I think some reversion to the mean here at 6.5 makes sense. They have Clemson, Notre Dame, Florida State, and UNC, so pr- probably a bowl team, but very borderline. I think that regression makes sense. Pittsburgh, again, tough schedule as you can see there, so it makes sense that they kind of write them back from 8 to 6.5. Still moving up. I actually, it pains me to give such compliments to NC State, but 6.5 seems crazy low. They never get 10 wins, and they won't this year. Um, but I really like Brennan Armstrong and Robert Nye teaming up again, going there. Their offense has been kind of drab and bland, and you'd think they just pound you with a rock, but they're actually not that effective running it at times. Um, I think they're going to really innovate that offense this year with Robert Nye there. I think I don't know that their defense is going to be as good, but 6.5 feels low. So I could see them doing well. Whereas with Miami, they only had 5 wins, and all the talent and the brand name um, kind of makes, I guess, makes the betters overshoot them every year. It's almost like the Texas effect with the Longhorns. But they have A&M, UNC, Clemson, and Florida State. That feels like the strongest underplay. They certainly have the talent to get 7, 8, 9 wins, but um, it just feels like they won't because they seem to almost always underperform. Louisville is kind of my darling ACC pick. They have just such a fortunate schedule. They have 2 tough non-conference games with Notre Dame and Kentucky, and maybe they lose both of them. In fact, I think they probably do. But um, their ACC schedule is a total cakewalk. They brought in Jeff Brom, former alumni, to be the head coach from Purdue. They brought in Jack Plummer, who had 3,095 passing yards at Cal last year. Brought him in via the transfer portal. Uh, I don't know that they're going to win the ACC, but if Clemson or Florida State, if the loser of that head-to-head were to slip up again, it's quite possible Louisville has 2 non-conference losses, but only 1 ACC loss, and sneaks into that championship game at 9-3. I think that is totally, a real possibility. Um, North Carolina, they had 9 wins last year. They're projected here at 8.5 as the over/under. Um, they got both South Carolina and Minnesota in the non-conference. They avoid Florida State, but they have to go to Clemson. I don't love them this year. I feel like there is some regression due for them. They lost wide receiver Josh Downs, Josh Downs. They lost their offensive coordinator Phil Longo. They lost their offensive line coach. They lost their tight ends coach. I feel like Mac Brown's got to be getting near the end. He's a coach that gets a lot of respect, a lot of, I don't want to say hype, but um, a lot of good things put on his name and what they do there. But it seems like they beat up on bad Coastal Division teams and aren't actually that good when they play decent competition. Um, you saw it against Notre Dame, you saw it against Clemson, you saw it in their bowl game against Oregon. I don't know. The way they ended last year, they even lost to Georgia Tech, NC State. They just fell apart, and then they lose a lot of key pieces. I am not high on them, and that's another one where I'd lean the under. And of course, all of these very, very, very early. I have certainly reserved, well, let's see what happens in fall camp, and we'll get a little bit more precise. But, it's fun to talk about now as we're kind of early in this thing. And then, of course, you have Florida State and you have Clemson. So it's really interesting that we keep seeing Clemson below Florida State. It's becoming very consistent. Um, Clemson at 9.5 wins, Florida State at 10. Um, so interestingly, if you look nationally, Georgia is projected at 11.5. Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama are all 10.5. And right there behind them is Florida State at 10. And then there's a big glut of teams at 9.5. And Clemson's in that group. Florida State has a reasonably tough schedule. They do avoid North Carolina, although I'm not that high on North Carolina anyway. But they face LSU, and this year's in Orlando, and they go to Gainesville, and they go to Clemson. Those are three. I don't know how good Florida is, but you're going to the swamp. So those are three pretty, reasonably tough games. And they did lose to Wake Forest last year and NC State. So I don't know that it seems 10 seems high. I think 10 feels closer to the ceiling than the breaking point. I could see them splitting with Clemson and LSU, and then you're saying they're not going to drop any other games if you're going to hit the over on that 10. They are a really interesting team. They last year they broke through and had a good year, but even that they lost to pretty much all the good teams they faced except for LSU. I think they were 3-3 against teams with a winning record. But they keep getting better and better. Jordan Travis is excellent. What's so interesting is they're not just really good at supplementing through the portal. They've built their team through the portal. Jordan Travis came from Louisville. Wide receiver Johnny Wilson, Arizona State. Winston Wright Jr., West Virginia. Running back Trey Benson, Oregon. On the offensive line, Bless Harris, Casey Roddick, Jeremiah Byers, all transfers. Jeremiah Byers just came in from UTEP, was a big ad. They got the tight end Jaheim Bell from South Carolina. I don't know if all these guys are going to start, but it looks like a lot, maybe all of them will start on that offense. And on defense, Jared Verse, their star players, a transfer from Albany. They just added Braden Fisk from Western Michigan. Tatum Bethune from UCF is a linebacker. Fentrell Cypress, I mentioned him when we were talking about Virginia. He's a great cornerback. They just added big ad. They got Greedy Vance Jr. from Louisville, Jerry and Jones from Mississippi State. I mean, it is. I don't know if all of these guys will start, but a lot of them will. They haven't just added. Georgia will add to their team. They added Dominic Lovett to boost their team in one area. We could use Georgia could use. They're thinking we can use a great wide receiver. So let's grab the one we need. They did that with Darian Kendrick when they needed a great cornerback. So they have a great roster and they pop in the very best from the portal. Florida State's not doing that. They're building their team based on that portal. And it's such a stark contrast to what Clemson does, where Clemson won't have Clemson may not give a meaningful snap to a transfer all year. They have Paul Tyson, um, who sounds like it's going to be the third string quarterback, and that's it. Um, so this clash of Clemson, we're not going to use the portal. We're going to invest in our guys, give a couple scholarships to former walk-ons. Less so this year. Right now, only one. Whereas Florida State, they are filling everything through the portal. It's really going to be an interesting clash. So we just haven't seen a team ever do this. We'll see if it can be done. I actually think it's a bold strategy and something for Florida State that they maybe had to do because they had so many down years. They weren't pulling in, they weren't dominating the high school recruiting uh, trail like they used to. But now they're just leaning in so heavily. It's such a big clash for Clemson. The offense does still have questions. I mean, especially a wide receiver. Bringing in an offensive coordinator, um, Garrett Riley is a big boost, but it doesn't fix personnel issues at wide receiver. Is Adam Randall the next Joe Ngata, a big guy who's hurt a lot and slow, or is he about to break out and be more like a Nuke Hopkins? We don't know. What is Cole Turner ready to contribute more than a big catch in every couple games? Is he going to be a big consistent contributor? We don't know. Antonio Williams cannot afford a sophomore slump for him. Um, can Bo Collins stay healthy and be a contributor all year? Big question mark. So I think that wide receiver room is the biggest question for Clemson. Obviously, Cade Klubnik is not proven yet, but from what I've heard, and even just what we saw, snippets, not so much against Tennessee, but especially against North Carolina, I have more confidence in him. Um, but there's some question marks. Now, the reason I think Clemson goes over here, I think the defense gets back to being totally elite. The secondary was pretty bad last year, and they look like they're really, really coming together. Sheridan Jones gives them that veteran stability. Nate Wiggins looks like he's going to be the next in that line of Clemson cornerbacks in the first, two rounds of the NFL draft. He looks great. Um, uh, and the safeties look so much better, so much depth. I love RJ Mickens. Angel Makuba's finally healthy. There's a lot of good pieces there. So many so that Malcolm Green transferred out. I think Toriano Pride and his progression at cornerback was probably part of that. So I think that defense, even if the offense is just okay, they'll be more competent with an elite offensive coordinator. And then I think that elite defense, I think that's the difference. And that's potentially why they're better than Florida State. Let's see what else Florida State does in the transfer portal. Let's see what happens in the fall. But right now, I'm looking at those teams as more like equals, with home field and Death Valley being the tiebreaker. Whereas everyone else seems to be liking Florida State. But you know what? I'm fine with that. I know Dabo's fine with that. They'll fire up the Roy bus before you even get to the postseason. They'll be doing it in September for Florida State. So, I say all the better. I think Clemson fans should welcome it. Um, Florida State's got, the pressure's on them now, I guess, if they're the favorite and Clemson's the hunter. Clemson's hunting for an ACC championship, even though they're the defending champs. So that's just the way Dabo likes it. It's going to be a lot more fun with another real foe in the ACC. If you're not already, please subscribe to this channel. I'd really appreciate it. The way the YouTube monetization works, you got to get 1,000 subscribers before you could start to monetize. And to that point, I am looking for an advertising partner for this channel. If you are interested, if you have a business or anything else you'd like to advertise, please reach out to me and we can work something out that I think would be hopefully a win-win. So definitely subscribe and reach out if you're interested in advertising with me. Thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed.